The room fell silent. Every eye was locked on the woman in the wheelchair, her expression unreadable as she stared up at the manager standing before her. His face was red with frustration, his voice sharp and dismissive. "I told you, we don't have time to cater to special needs customers right now," he snapped, waving a hand as if she were an inconvenience. "If you can't get up and grab what you need yourself, maybe you should shop somewhere else." Gasps rippled through the staff, watching from behind the counters, but no one spoke up. Some looked down, pretending not to hear. Others exchanged nervous glances, but remained frozen in place. The woman in the wheelchair didn't react, at least not visibly. Inside, her heart pounded. She had spent years building this company, pouring her soul into its foundation, believing it stood for kindness, respect, and integrity. And yet, here she was being belittled in one of her own stores by a manager she had hired. He didn't know who she was. No one did, and that was exactly why she was here. The truth had to come out. She inhaled deeply, gripping the wheels of the chair. Then she spoke. "You're making a terrible mistake." The manager scoffed. "Oh yeah? And why is that?" She hesitated just for a second, wondering if she should reveal herself now. But no, not yet. Not until she saw just how deep this problem ran. She lifted her chin and locked eyes with him. "Because I have more power than you think." The silence thickened, pressing down on everyone like a heavy weight. The manager laughed, shaking his head. "Oh really? And what are you going to do about it?" The woman in the wheelchair only smiled, because he had no idea who he had just insulted. A few weeks earlier, Madison Cole had been sitting in her high-rise office, gazing out at the city skyline. As the CEO of Colmart, one of the biggest retail chains in the country, she had everything she'd ever dreamed of: wealth, power, and a company she had built from the ground up. But something wasn't right. Lately, complaints had been trickling in. Not many, but enough to make her uneasy. Customers claiming they had been mistreated by staff. Employees whispering about toxic management. A few reports of discrimination. Madison refused to believe it at first. She had always been careful about who she hired. She had strict policies in place to ensure that every customer, no matter their background, was treated with dignity. And yet, the complaints kept coming. One night, unable to sleep, she found herself scrolling through customer reviews on the company's website. That's when she saw it. A review from a woman in a wheelchair. She had written about how a manager had ignored her, how the employees had pretended not to see her struggle, how she had left the store feeling humiliated. Madison's stomach twisted. She had worked too hard to build this company to let something like this happen under her watch. She needed to see the truth for herself. And that's when the idea hit her. What if she went undercover? What if she became the customer no one expected to be watching? It was risky. No CEO in their right mind would do something like this. But Madison wasn't just any CEO. She wanted the truth. And the truth, she knew, could only be found on the ground, where real customers were treated in ways the executives never saw. So she made a decision. With the help of her assistant, she crafted a plan. She would disguise herself, change her hair, wear thick glasses, dress in simple clothes. But most importantly, she would sit in a wheelchair. She would experience firsthand how her stores treated the people who needed the most help. And if she found what she feared, well, there would be consequences. Madison had visited 3 stores already. Some experiences had been good. Employees who went out of their way to help her, managers who truly cared. But others? Not so much. And now, standing in the middle of one of her busiest locations, facing a manager who had just insulted her in front of his entire team, she knew she had found a problem. A serious one. Her hands tightened on the wheels of the chair. She wasn't done yet. Not even close. And this manager? He had no idea what was coming next. Just as she was about to respond, another voice cut through the tension. "Is there a problem here?" Madison turned her head. One of the employees, a young woman in a red uniform, had stepped forward. Her face was pale, her hands clenched at her sides. Madison's heart leaped. Someone was about to speak up. Finally. But would it be enough? Would one brave employee change everything? Or was the problem bigger than she thought? She had her answer a second later. Because before the young woman could say another word, the manager whirled on her, his face twisting with anger. And then he said something Madison would never forget. Something that changed everything. "You keep your mouth shut," he hissed. "Unless you want to lose your job." Madison's breath caught. And in that moment, she knew. This wasn't just about one manager. This was about something much bigger. And she was going to tear it down. Madison's blood boiled. She had come undercover to see the truth, and now she had it. Right in front of her. A manager who had not only belittled a customer in need, but was now threatening an employee for daring to stand up. Her first instinct was to explode, to reveal herself, to fire him on the spot, to make an example of him in front of the entire store. But no, not yet. If this was happening here, in one of her best-performing stores, how many others had managers like him? How many employees had been silenced? How many customers had walked away feeling humiliated, just like she nearly had? If she revealed herself now, she'd only be fixing one store. She needed to know how deep the rot went. Madison forced herself to stay calm. She let her gaze shift to the young woman in the red uniform, the one who had just been threatened. The girl was trembling, her lips pressed into a thin line as she lowered her eyes, clearly afraid to say another word. The manager smirked, thinking he had won. Madison wasn't about to let that happen. She gave him a slow, steady look. "What's your name?" she asked, her voice calm but firm. The manager looked surprised. "What? Your name?" He hesitated, then puffed out his chest. "It's Kyle," he said, his voice carrying that same arrogance as before. "And you?" Madison tilted her head slightly. "Oh, don't worry. You'll find out soon enough." Kyle let out a short, humorless laugh. "Lady, I don't have time for games. Are you buying something or not?" Madison stared at him for a long moment. Then, she turned to the young employee. "And you? What's your name?" The girl looked scared but hesitated only a moment before speaking. "Jessica," she said softly. Madison gave her a small nod. "Thank you." Kyle rolled his eyes. "Look, if you're done making a scene, I'd like to speak to your district manager," Madison interrupted. That wiped the smirk off his face. Kyle's eyes narrowed. "Why?" Madison smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "I just have some feedback." Kyle hesitated. He clearly wasn't expecting her to push back. "He's not available," he said quickly. "Besides, I doubt he cares about." "Oh, I think he will." For the first time, Madison saw uncertainty flash in his eyes. But before he could say anything else, she gave a small, deliberate nod and spun her wheelchair away. She wasn't going to waste another second arguing with him. She had what she needed. But this wasn't over. Not even close. The next morning, Madison sat in her office, her hands folded on the desk, staring at the list of Colmart locations spread in front of her. She had her assistant, Lisa, standing beside her, watching carefully. Lisa was the only person in the company who knew what Madison had been doing. "Well," Lisa asked, "what's the verdict?" Madison exhaled sharply. "It's worse than I thought." Lisa frowned. "That bad?" Madison nodded. Kyle wasn't just rude. He was cruel. He was comfortable with it. And the worst part? The employees were too scared to stand up to him. Lisa looked down at the list of stores. "If it's happening there, it's probably happening elsewhere." "Exactly," Madison said. Lisa hesitated. "So what now?" Madison tapped her fingers against the desk. "We go deeper." Lisa's eyebrows shot up. "You mean, you're doing it again?" Madison leaned back in her chair. "I've only scratched the surface," she said. "If I really want to know what's happening in my stores, I need to keep going." Lisa hesitated, then nodded. "All right, but be careful, Madison. Not everyone is going to take kindly to being exposed." Madison's lips curved into a small, knowing smile. They don't know who they're messing with. 2 days later, Madison entered another store, this time in a different city. Same disguise, same wheelchair. And this time, she didn't even make it past the entrance before trouble found her. As soon as she rolled into the store, she noticed a group of employees standing near the front counter, laughing and joking. She ignored them at first, focusing on navigating toward the produce section. But as she passed by, she caught something in the corner of her eye. One of the employees, a tall young man with a name tag that read Ethan, nudged his friend and whispered something. Then they laughed. Loudly. Madison's stomach twisted. She wasn't naive. She knew how some people viewed those in wheelchairs. But to see it happening, so openly in her own store was infuriating. Still, she pushed forward. She wasn't here to pick fights. She was here to see the truth. But the moment she reached for a bag of apples, the laughter grew louder. Then she heard it. Maybe she needs a babysitter, one of them muttered. More laughter. Madison gritted her teeth. She turned slightly, locking eyes with Ethan. He smirked. That was it. Madison squared her shoulders and rolled toward them. Something funny? She asked. The group fell silent. Ethan's smirk wavered, but he recovered quickly. Not just joking around. Madison didn't blink. Joking around? He shrugged. Relax, lady. Don't take it so seriously. Madison nodded slowly. I see. And tell me, is this how you treat all your customers? Or just the ones in wheelchairs? Ethan's face paled slightly. I didn't mean anything by it. Madison let the silence stretch. And then she did something that made the entire group stiffen. She smiled. Not a friendly smile. A knowing smile. A dangerous smile. One that said, you just made a very big mistake. Ethan swallowed. The others looked nervous now, shifting uncomfortably under her gaze. Enjoy your shift, Madison said softly. Then, she turned and rolled away. But in her mind, she was already making a mental note. Because Ethan's name was going on a very special list. And soon, he was going to regret ever laughing at her. But the moment she reached the next aisle, something happened that changed everything. A voice, low and urgent, whispered from behind. Ma'am, you need to be careful. Madison froze. She turned her wheelchair slightly, her eyes scanning the shelves. Then she saw her. A woman in her late 40s, wearing a Colmart uniform, standing halfway behind a stack of cereal boxes. Her face was lined with worry, and she was looking around nervously as if making sure no one else heard. Madison's pulse quickened. Why? She asked quietly. The woman took a quick breath. Because if you keep pushing, you're going to find out something you're not ready for. Madison's heart pounded. What do you mean? She asked. The woman hesitated. Then, she took a step closer and whispered for words that sent chills down Madison's spine. They're hiding something big. Madison's pulse thundered in her ears. They're hiding something big. The woman, her name tag read Linda, glanced around the aisle nervously, her fingers gripping the edge of the shelf as if she expected someone to yank her away at any moment. Madison's mind raced. What was Linda talking about? Mistreatment of customers? A toxic work environment? Or was it something worse? She had to know. But before she could ask, Linda shook her head, her voice barely above a whisper. I can't talk here, she said. They're watching. Madison frowned. Who's watching? Linda's eyes darted to the front of the store. Management. And not just the store managers. The higher-ups. Madison's skin prickled. She was the higher-up. The highest, in fact. And yet, here was an employee warning her about her own people. This was bigger than she thought. Meet me outside after your shopping, Linda whispered. By the loading dock in the back. But be careful. Before Madison could say another word, Linda straightened up, grabbed a box from the shelf as if she were stocking it, and walked away as if nothing had happened. Madison sat still for a moment, gripping the arms of her wheelchair. She had come here expecting to expose bad employees, maybe even a toxic store manager. But now, she was uncovering something much darker. She inhaled slowly, forcing herself to stay calm. She had to play it smart. For the next 20 minutes, she continued shopping, pretending to be just another customer. She noticed Ethan and his group still lurking near the registers, watching her every move. But she ignored them. Once she had picked up a few random items, just enough to keep up her disguise, she made her way to the checkout counter. The cashier, a young woman with tired eyes, barely looked at her as she scanned the items. That'll be $18.47, she muttered. Madison handed over a 20. As she waited for her change, she glanced around, making sure no one was following her. Then, receipt in hand, she rolled toward the exit. She could feel eyes on her. She just didn't know whose. Outside, the sun had started to set, casting long shadows across the parking lot. Madison maneuvered toward the side of the building, keeping her pace steady, casual. She didn't want to look like she was sneaking around. but her heart pounded with every turn of her wheels. When she reached the loading dock, she found it mostly empty, except for a few crates stacked near the back door. For a moment, she thought Linda had set her up. But then, "I thought you weren't going to come." Madison turned. Linda stood just inside the dock shadow, arms crossed over her chest. She looked even more anxious than before. "I need you to tell me everything," Madison said, keeping her voice steady. Linda hesitated, glancing around again. Then, she exhaled and said, "It's not just this store. It's a lot of them. Things have been happening, things that customers don't see. And anyone who speaks up," she swallowed hard, "they disappear." Madison's stomach clenched. "Disappear?" Linda nodded. "Not in a murder mystery kind of way, but they get fired. Moved to different locations. Some of them just quit out of nowhere. It's like management knows how to make people go away." Madison frowned. "And what exactly are they covering up?" Linda hesitated again. Then, she leaned in slightly. "Corporate's been cutting corners. Badly. They're underpaying workers, overloading shifts, and worse. They're taking illegal shortcuts with products. Expired food getting repackaged. Faulty items being resold as new. Employees who complain get bullied into silence. And if they don't shut up," Madison gritted her teeth, "they get pushed out." Linda nodded. "Exactly." A cold fury settled in Madison's chest. She had built Colmart to be a company that helped people, that treated employees well, that cared about customers. If even half of what Linda was saying was true, then someone, probably multiple people, had been rotting it from the inside out. She had suspected mistreatment. But this was corruption, and had to be stopped. But before she could ask another question, Linda's eyes widened in fear. "Someone's coming," she whispered. Madison turned just in time to see a figure stepping out from the other side of the dock. A man in a dark gray shirt, and his gaze was locked right on them. Madison's heart pounded. He had been listening, and judging by the look on his face, he knew what they had been talking about. Then, without saying a word, he reached for the walkie-talkie clipped to his belt and lifted it to his mouth. Madison's breath caught. He was calling someone, and whatever happened next, it wasn't going to be good. Madison's grip tightened on the wheels of her chair as the man raised his walkie-talkie to his mouth. She could hear the static crackle before he even spoke. "We got a problem," he said, his voice low but firm. "Loading dock. Now." Linda sucked in a sharp breath. "We need to go," she whispered urgently. Madison didn't need to be told twice. She spun her wheelchair around, pushing as fast as she could toward the side of the building. Linda hurried alongside her, her head ducked low as if she was afraid to be recognized. Behind them, the man in the gray shirt wasn't chasing them yet. But Madison could hear the heavy boots of someone else approaching. They were running out of time. "Where do we go?" Madison asked under her breath. Linda didn't hesitate. "Back in trance. Employees use it for breaks. If we're lucky, no one's watching." They turned the corner, slipping into the narrow alleyway between the store and the next building. Madison's heart pounded in her chest. She wasn't afraid of getting caught. She was afraid of what getting caught meant. If what Linda had said was true, then someone in corporate, someone high up, had been covering up illegal activity. The mistreatment of employees and customers was just the surface. The real question was, who was behind it? And how far were they willing to go to keep it hidden? They reached the back door. Linda yanked it open, and they slipped inside, finding themselves in a dimly lit storage hallway. "This way," Linda whispered, leading Madison down the hall. "There's a side exit near the stockroom." Madison followed without question. The air smelled of cardboard and cleaning chemicals. Metal shelves lined the walls, stocked with extra inventory. They moved quickly, the silence between them heavy. Then, a voice echoed from behind. "Where do you think you're going?" Madison and Linda froze. Slowly they turned. Kyle, the arrogant manager from earlier, stood at the other end of the hall, arms crossed, a smug smile playing on his lips. But he wasn't alone. 2 other employees flanked him. And, judging by their expressions, they weren't here to help. Madison's pulse kicked into high gear. Linda took a step closer to Madison's wheelchair, her body tense. Kyle tilted his head. "You know, I had a feeling you were going to be trouble," he said, his tone lazy, casual. I don't know who you think you are, snooping around like this, but I'd suggest turning that chair around and rolling right back out the way you came. Madison held his gaze, her jaw tightening. She could feel the weight of his words, the threat beneath them. He didn't know who she was, but he knew she had seen too much, and he wasn't going to let her leave easily. Linda shifted beside her. Madison could feel the tension radiating off her. "We don't want trouble," Linda said carefully. "We were just—" Kyle scoffed. "Trouble? Lady, you're trouble." He took a step forward. "And trouble gets dealt with." Madison's fingers curled around the wheels of her chair. She wasn't afraid of Kyle, but she didn't like where this was heading. Kyle smirked. "Tell you what," he said. "Why don't you hand over your little shopping bags? Give me whatever notes or recordings you've got, and we forget this ever happened." Madison didn't blink. He thought she had evidence. That meant he knew there was something to hide, and that meant he was desperate. Kyle sighed when neither she nor Linda moved. "Look, lady, you don't belong here, and I don't mean in this store." His eyes flicked to Madison's wheelchair, then back to her face. "People like you always sticking your noses where they don't belong." A rush of anger surged through Madison. Kyle had just made a mistake, a big one, because he had underestimated her. And Madison never let that slide. She smiled. Kyle frowned. Then, in one swift motion, Madison reached into her shopping bag and pulled out her phone. Kyle's eyes widened. "Smile," Madison said coolly, clicking the record button. For the first time, uncertainty flickered across Kyle's face. The two employees behind him shifted uncomfortably. "Lady, turn that off." "What?" Madison interrupted. "You seemed so confident a second ago. Why don't you go ahead and repeat what you just said?" Kyle's jaw clenched. "You're making a mistake." "No," Madison said. "You did." She turned her phone toward Linda. "This is Linda," Madison said into the camera, "a hard-working employee of this store. She has witnessed illegal activity happening here at Colmart. And this is Kyle." She turned the phone back to him, "a manager who just tried to intimidate us and is staying silent." Kyle's face turned red. "Turn that off." Madison raised an eyebrow. "Make me." The hallway was dead silent. Kyle's fists clenched. But he knew, they all knew, that if he so much as took a step toward her now, she had them caught on camera. And that was checkmate. Kyle's jaw ticked, but he didn't move. Behind him, one of the employees shifted nervously. "Dude, maybe we should just—" "Shut up," Kyle snapped. Madison smiled again. "I think we're done here," she said. "Unless you want to try and stop me." Kyle's face was thunderous, but he stayed frozen. Madison took that as her cue. She turned and rolled away, Linda hurrying beside her. The moment they reached the side door, Linda pushed it open, and they slipped out into the cool night air. Neither of them spoke until they were safely across the parking lot. Then, Linda let out a shaky breath. "That was close." Madison finished. Linda nodded. Madison looked down at her phone. The video was still recording. She pressed stop. She had what she needed. Kyle wasn't the only problem in this company, but he was proof that there was a problem. And now, Madison wasn't just looking for bad managers anymore. She was hunting down everyone responsible for this mess. But just as she was about to speak, her phone buzzed. A blocked number. She hesitated, then answered. Silence. Then, a distorted voice crackled through the speaker. "You don't know what you started." The call ended. Madison stared at the screen. And for the first time since this started, she realized she might have just stepped into something much bigger than she ever expected. Madison's grip tightened around her phone as the call ended, leaving only an eerie silence in its wake. "You don't know what you've started." The words echoed in her head, sending a cold chill down her spine. Whoever it was, they knew. They knew she was digging, and they wanted her to stop. Linda must have seen the change in Madison's expression because she frowned. "What's wrong?" Madison slowly lowered the phone. "Someone just called me." A blocked number. Linda's face paled. "And they said, I don't know what I've started." Linda swallowed hard. "That's a warning." Madison exhaled sharply. She had expected resistance. She had expected pushback from bad managers and corrupt employees. But this was different. This was bigger. Someone with power was watching her, and they didn't like what they saw. She looked at Linda, her mind racing. You said earlier that corporate's involved in this. Do you know any names? Linda hesitated, then slowly shook her head. Not directly, but I do know this. There are certain stores where managers act like they own the place. Like I know someone high up has their back, no matter what they do. Madison's jaw tightened. That meant this wasn't just about bad store managers. Someone above them was protecting them. And now, that someone knew she was coming for them. She wasn't afraid, but she was more determined than ever. She turned to Linda. I need to get deeper into this. Linda's eyes widened. Madison, they're already watching you. If you keep going, I have to, Madison interrupted. If I stop now, they win. And I didn't build this company just to let corrupt people tear it apart. Linda was silent for a moment. Then, she exhaled and gave a small nod. Okay, what do you need me to do? Madison studied her for a second. Linda had already risked so much by talking to her. And yet, she was still willing to help. That meant something. I need information, Madison said. Names, dates, any records you can find about these stores and their managers. Linda hesitated. That's going to be dangerous. If they find out I'm helping you. They won't, Madison said firmly. We'll be careful. Linda bit her lip, then nodded. All right, I'll see what I can find. Madison gave her a small, appreciative smile. Thank you, Linda. I won't forget this. Linda sighed. Just promise me one thing. What? Be careful, Linda said. Whoever is behind this, they're not just going to let you take them down without a fight. Madison met her gaze. I'm counting on it. The next morning, Madison sat in her office, staring at the video on her phone. Kyle's face was frozen on the screen, mid-smirk. She had watched it 3 times already, analyzing every detail. This was proof, but it wasn't enough. She needed more. She needed to find out who was pulling the strings. Her office phone rang. She picked it up. Madison Cole. Lisa's voice came through the line, sharp with urgency. Madison, you need to see this. What is it? I just got an email, Lisa said, from an anonymous source. Madison frowned. Anonymous? Yes, Lisa said. But that's not the crazy part. Then what is? Lisa hesitated. Then, they sent us internal documents, Madison. Leaked documents. Madison's heart skipped a beat. What kind of documents? Lisa's voice was hushed now, almost nervous. Payroll adjustments. Manager promotions. Corporate approvals for cost-cutting measures. She paused. And records of product tampering. Madison's stomach clenched. She had suspected it. Now, she had proof. Send them to me, Madison said. I already did, Lisa replied. But that's not all. Madison's pulse quickened. There's more. Lisa hesitated again. Then, she said 2 words that changed everything. Check page 5. Madison quickly opened the email on her computer and downloaded the files. She scrolled to page 5, and there it was. Her breath caught, because at the bottom of the document was a signature, and it wasn't just any signature. It was someone she knew, someone very high up in the company, someone she had trusted, her vice president. Madison's blood ran cold. This corruption, this cover-up, it wasn't just happening under her nose. It was happening in her own office. And now, she wasn't just investigating bad managers anymore. She was about to go head-to-head with the second most powerful person in the company. The real fight had just begun. Madison stared at the screen, her hands clenched into fists. Her vice president, Michael Graves, a man she had worked with for years, a man she had trusted, and now, he was at the center of it all. The documents in front of her weren't just proof of corruption. They were a smoking gun. They showed that Michael had approved cost-cutting measures that put customers and employees at risk. He had personally signed off on the repackaging of expired goods, the rehiring of managers with histories of workplace abuse, and the termination of employees who had spoken out. He wasn't just ignoring the problem. He was the problem. Madison's jaw tightened. This wasn't just about Colmart anymore. This was about taking him down. Her phone buzzed again. Lisa. Madison picked up immediately. Tell me you're seeing this. I'm seeing it, Lisa said, her voice tense. And Madison, this isn't just bad. It's criminal. Madison exhaled sharply. I know. Lisa hesitated. So what's the plan? Are you going public? Madison shook her head. Not yet. Lisa sounded surprised. Why not? Because we don't know how deep this goes, Madison said. Michael couldn't have done this alone. He has people protecting him. If we act too soon, he'll cover his tracks before we can get everything we need. Lisa was silent for a moment. Then she sighed. You're right. But Madison, this is dangerous. If Michael finds out you're onto him. He already knows, Madison interrupted. They called me last night. Someone's been watching me since the moment I started investigating. Lisa's breath hitched. Oh my God. Madison leaned back in her chair, gripping the armrests. This means we have to be smart. We have to gather everything before we make a move. Lisa hesitated. And how we do that? Madison's lips pressed into a thin line. I go deeper. Lisa groaned. Oh no, you're not seriously thinking about. I need to get into corporate's internal system, Madison said. There's more information out there. Payroll records, hidden financials, email chains. If I can get into Michael's files, I can take him down. Lisa exhaled. Okay, so how do we do that? Madison's eyes darkened. I need to get into headquarters. Later that evening, Madison sat in her car, staring up at the Colmark corporate headquarters. It was a towering glass building, sleek and modern, standing as a symbol of everything she had built. But now, she looked at it differently. Somewhere inside, Michael was sitting comfortably in his office, unaware that his empire was about to collapse. Madison had worked late nights here, had made some of the toughest business decisions of her life here. And now, she was about to break into her own company. Lisa's voice crackled through the earpiece. All right, I've got you connected. You're sure about this? Madison smirked. Would I be sitting outside my own office at 10 o'clock at night if I wasn't? Lisa sighed. Okay. Here's what you need to do. Security does their rounds every 30 minutes. You got a window right now before they come back to the lobby. Madison grabbed her employee badge and stepped out of the car. She wasn't dressed like a CEO tonight. She wore black jeans, a hoodie, and sneakers. A disguise as simple as it was effective. She wheeled up to the front entrance, swiping her badge. The light blinked green. The doors clicked open. Madison rolled inside, keeping her movement steady, confident. She knew this building better than anyone. And right now, that was her biggest advantage. She moved quickly, taking the elevator to the executive floor. Lisa's voice came through again. Okay, you're almost there. Michael's office is at the end of the hall. His assistant usually locks his computer when she leaves, but I sent a request earlier that should have overridden the system. You should be able to log in. Madison smirked. You're scary, you know that? Just hurry up, Lisa muttered. Madison reached the office and pushed the door open. The room was dark, but the city lights outside cast a faint glow across the sleek furniture. She moved straight to Michael's desk. The computer was still on. She clicked the mouse. The screen lit up. Her heart pounded. It worked. Lisa spoke again. Okay, I'm on my end. I'm running a scan for anything suspicious. Madison's fingers hovered over the keyboard. Then, a notification popped up. New email. Urgent. CEO investigation. Madison's breath caught. She clicked on it, and her blood ran cold. It was an email from Michael. 2 regional directors. Subject. Urgent. CEO investigation. We have a problem. Madison Cole has been seen at multiple store locations, speaking with employees. She is looking into recent changes in policy and could pose a serious threat to our operations. We need to control this before it escalates. Keep eyes on her. If she makes any moves against corporate, we'll handle it. Madison's hands shook. Michael knew. And worse, he was planning something. Lisa's voice came through, sharp with alarm. Madison, get out of there. Now. Madison swallowed hard, but she didn't move, because then another email popped up. This one wasn't from Michael. It was from an unknown sender, and the subject line sent a chill down her spine. You're running out of time. Madison clicked it. Inside was only one sentence. They know you're in the building. The office door clicked shut behind her. Madison froze. Then, footsteps. Someone was in the room. She turned her wheelchair slowly and came face to face with Michael Graves. His smile was cold. I was wondering when you'd finally start asking questions, he said. Madison's heart pounded. She had just walked into the lion's den, and now she had to find a way out. Madison kept her face calm, but inside, her mind was racing. Michael Graves stood in front of the door, blocking her exit. His suit was perfectly pressed, his expression smooth, too smooth. He wasn't surprised to see her, which meant he'd been expecting this. "I have to say, Madison," Michael drawled, stepping forward, "I admire your persistence. Sneaking into corporate headquarters? That's bold. Even for you." Madison didn't blink. "Bold? No, Michael. Necessary." Michael smirked. "Is that what you think?" Madison tapped her fingers against the armrest of her wheelchair, her heart pounding. She needed to keep him talking. "Tell me, Michael," she said coolly. "How long have you been running this little operation behind my back?" Michael sighed dramatically. "That depends. What exactly do you think I'm doing?" Madison let out a humorless laugh. "Oh, come on. We both know I've seen enough." Michael raised an eyebrow. "Have you?" Madison's gaze flickered toward the computer screen, where his emails were still open. She needed to get out of here with proof. Lisa's voice was faint in her earpiece. "Madison, say the word, and I'll shut down his network access." Madison didn't respond. Not yet. She had to play this carefully. Michael chuckled, as if this were some amusing game. "Let's cut to the chase, shall we? You went digging where you shouldn't have. And now you think you can stop something bigger than you." Madison tilted her head. "Bigger than me? You do realize you're talking to the CEO, right?" Michael's smile didn't waver. "And yet, you didn't know what was happening in your own company. Makes you wonder, who's really in charge?" Madison's jaw tightened. "Not you. Not for much longer." Michael exhaled, shaking his head as if he were disappointed. "I was hoping you'd be smarter than this." He took a step closer, and that's when Madison saw it. A second figure, standing in the shadows, watching. Madison's breath caught. She had been so focused on Michael that she hadn't realized she wasn't alone. The figure shifted, stepping into the dim glow of the office lights. A woman. Tall. Sharp eyes. Madison's stomach dropped. It was Evelyn Carter, the head of legal. And if she was here, then this was so much worse than Madison had thought. Evelyn clasped her hands in front of her, her expression unreadable. "Madison." Madison narrowed her eyes. "So, legal's involved too." Evelyn didn't blink. "You should have left this alone." Madison clenched her jaw. "Why?" "Because I wasn't supposed to know that you've been covering up fraud, employee abuse, selling expired products to customers." Michael let out a low chuckle. "You really think you can pin all that on me?" Madison's pulse quickened. "I don't think, Michael." "I know." Michael sighed. "You're making a mess out of something that was already under control." "Under control?" Madison repeated, her voice laced with fury. "You mean under your control?" Michael's smirk deepened. "You say that like it's a bad thing." Madison's hands curled into fists. Lisa's voice crackled in her ear. "Madison, I'm ready to pull the plug on his entire access. Just say the word." "Not yet." She needed to push them further. "You've been bleeding this company dry," Madison said, keeping her voice steady. "And for what? Profit." Michael tilted his head. "You should understand better than anyone, Madison. Business is about making the hard choices." "Hard choices?" Madison scoffed. "Cutting wages? Threatening employees? Endangering customers? That's not a hard choice, Michael. That's greed." Michael sighed, rubbing his temple. "I thought we could avoid this, but I see now that you're determined." Evelyn finally spoke again. "Walk away, Madison." Madison blinked. "Excuse me." Evelyn's voice was smooth, careful. "You have a reputation, a company, a legacy. Don't throw it away over this." Madison stared at her. "Are you threatening me?" Evelyn's expression didn't change. "I'm giving you a way out." Michael folded his arms. "It's simple. You step down. We make sure it looks clean. You get a nice severance package, and you walk away with your name intact." Madison's breath caught. They weren't just trying to silence her. They were trying to erase her. She forced a laugh. "You think I'd ever agree to that?" Michael exhaled. "I was really hoping you would." Madison's eyes flickered toward the desk. She needed to get her phone. She needed to record this. But before she could reach for it, Michael stepped forward, lowering his voice. "You've been CEO for a long time, Madison," he murmured. "Maybe it's time to let someone else run things." Madison held his gaze. "Like you." Michael's smirk returned. "It would be easier that way." Madison's heart pounded. This wasn't just about corruption anymore. Michael, and Evelyn weren't just trying to cover their tracks. They were trying to take over the company. Lisa's voice was urgent in her ear. Madison, we have to move now. Madison knew she was out of time. She had to make a choice. Either walk away and let them win, or fight back, right here, right now. She took a slow breath. Then, in one swift motion, she slammed her hand down on the keyboard. Michael's smirk vanished. What the hell are you doing? Madison leaned back, smiling coldly. Something bold. Lisa's voice rang through her earpiece. Network shutdown initiated. Security's been alerted. Michael's eyes widened. Evelyn's face darkened. You idiot. The computer screen went black. The entire office plunged into silence. Then, the sound of security alarms blaring through the building. Michael's face twisted in fury. You really shouldn't have done that. Madison didn't flinch. Try and stop me, she said. The office door burst open. Security guards flooded in. And in that moment, Madison knew the war had just begun. The alarms blared, red warning lights flashing against the sleek office walls. Security guards stormed into the room, their eyes scanning the situation. Michael stepped forward, his face a mask of anger. But underneath, Madison saw something else. Panic. He was losing control. Evelyn lifted a hand, as if to smooth things over. There's been a misunderstanding, she said smoothly, turning toward the guards. Everything is fine. We don't need. Madison cut her off. Actually, we do need security. The guards hesitated. Their eyes darted between Madison, their CEO, and Michael, the company's vice president. One of the guards, a tall man with a buzz cut, cleared his throat. Ma'am. Madison turned to face him directly. Her voice was calm, but her words carried power. I am Madison Cole, CEO of Colmart. This man, she pointed at Michael, and this woman, she gestured to Evelyn, have been orchestrating fraud, employee mistreatment, and corporate corruption under my nose. I just shut down their network access before they could cover it up. Michael let out a sharp laugh. Oh, come on, Madison. You have no proof. Madison's smirk was slow. She reached into her pocket and pulled out her phone. One tap, and a recording of their entire conversation played aloud. Michael's voice echoed through the room. You step down. We make sure it looks clean. You get a nice severance package, and you walk away with your name intact. Evelyn's smooth voice followed. I'm giving you a way out. The room froze. The guards exchanged glances. Michael's face drained of color. You. Oh, I did, Madison said, her smile sharp. And guess what? Lisa's already uploaded this to our legal department, the board of directors, and she turned the screen toward him, every major news outlet in the country. Michael took a step back. You wouldn't. Madison arched an eyebrow. I already did. Evelyn's face was stone cold. But in her eyes, Madison saw something new. Fear. Because this wasn't just about getting fired. This was about criminal charges. Michael clenched his jaw. Then, without another word, he lunged for Madison's phone. But before he could even touch her, one of the security guards grabbed him, twisting his arms behind his back. Don't move, the guard barked. Michael thrashed. Let me go. Evelyn took a step back, her hands raised. I didn't. Save it, Madison interrupted. Security detained both of them. Effective immediately, Michael Graves and Evelyn Carter are removed from their positions at Colmart. The guards hesitated for only a moment. Then, two of them moved forward, gripping Evelyn's arms. Michael was still fighting. You can't do this. You can't. Oh, I can, Madison said, her voice like steel. And you know what else? She leaned forward slightly, her voice dropping to a whisper. I'm going to make sure you never work in this industry again. Michael went still. For the first time, his confidence shattered. He knew it was over. Madison nodded at security. Take them to holding until the authorities arrive. Michael's face contorted in rage. But as the guards dragged him and Evelyn from the office, all Madison felt was relief. It was over. The corruption, the lies, the poison that had been seeping through her company. She had cut it out at the root. Lisa's voice rang through her earpiece. Madison. Madison exhaled, pressing a hand to her forehead. Yeah. You just took down one of the most corrupt people in the industry, Lisa said. Madison allowed herself a small smile. I know. Lisa let out a breathy laugh. So what now, boss? Madison turned toward the massive windows of her office, looking out at the city below. She had spent years building Colmar into something good, and now she was going to make sure it stayed that way. No more corruption, Madison said. No more managers like Kyle. No more silencing employees. From now on, her gaze hardened. We do things the right way. And with that, Madison Cole, CEO of Colmart, rolled her wheelchair forward, ready to rebuild her company the right way.